Welcome to today's episode. Thank you all for joining us. Today we have an exciting episode. We will be discussing the state of education in America. Of course, it's multifaceted. So we have multiple topics and areas to discuss. If you, the listeners, have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to tap in or type your messages, and we will be glad to address them. Our panelists, would you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
My name is Richelle Anderson, education for over 20 years, both at the elementary, middle, and high level, as well as the district level. Thanks for the invite and looking forward to a great conversation.
Okay, well, let's jump right in. I have a few topics listed that we can discuss. In no particular order. I would like to hear how you feel about these topics, and if you want some clarification, just let me know. Or we can go in order. The first topic is the pandemic learning loss, how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted students, with many of them still struggling to recover academically, especially the kids who are already behind. I mean, in some feel they needed the hands-on one-on-one, and they were pushed to do online learning or homebound instruction. What effect do you think it had or will have?
Well, I'm not sure that it was more so from my standpoint, just the pandemic as far as learning loss. I think we've always experienced learning loss, particularly in education. Typically, most of us identify that during the summer months when our young people were out for the summer and not engaged in, again, academic focus points at that time. And so your educators would always feel that when they return to school, that there was always some type of learning loss, and there is to be expected. That is to be expected. However, I believe what the pandemic taught us and what it did show us and reveal was that there was significant learning loss that was present, and the disparities became greater in our most rural districts and or those families or homes where our young people were definitely not engaged in a pattern where education was something that they actually did or was expected to do or they could not do because of the support or lack thereof. And it's not because parents or guardians didn't want to do it. It was probably more that they did not understand what to do themselves. It could have been from the standpoint of the lack of technology, because most of us went to online learning at that time, and that was new for us, to all of us. And so I don't know that I would just say that it was just the pandemic. I believe that the pandemic allowed us to see what we had been dealing with, but the disparities became greater in certain areas.
Now, so you have me thinking, and it was new for everyone and unexpected, right? And I think that actually ties into the second topic where we talk about funding disparities. How would that impact this? So were you all prepared as far as technology? Were you one-to-one? Or were there any challenges?
We were one-to-one in our district, but because our district is so rural, we still had individual families that were unable to connect to the hotspot and or were able to navigate.
Also, you all provided hotspots for everyone in the district.
We did. We did provide hotspots for everyone in the district, and we used COVID relief funds to support that. However, even with that, when you have multiple kids in one home, that became a challenge as well, because you could, one child could be connected and then you have another child in the home that could not connect. And one hotspot was supposed to be able to connect maybe at least 6 computers. That didn't happen always. And or you had individuals that just could not navigate in general. what to do and how to locate, the sign on, et cetera, what to do. And that became an issue as well. So as far as funding, and that was a part of your question, as far as funding disparities, of course, money was there. There were stipulations around what you could do from the governance standpoint. And of course, there was governance over that and oversight. So you were very much so being watched, so to speak, as to what you did and parameters in which you remain. However, these disparities were not, again, an issue in districts that, and I shouldn't say an issue, so to speak, because they felt that they still had issues. However, their issues were not as extreme as some districts' issues that already experience issues. So when when you're not comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges, then you expect for there to be certain disparities and differences. What I do believe the pandemic relief funds did do was afford districts that did not have the proper tax base or a healthy tax base to at some point have funding that they never had before. So they were able to do things with those funds that they would not have been afforded an opportunity to do without those funds being present.
Mm. Now, have you seen any trends from test scores that shows that there was a other positive or negative impact from kids being out during COVID?
I think that in our district, and I can speak for our district in particular, we saw trends both on twofold. We saw trends from the standpoint for our young people who were already struggling learners. It was difficult for them. They did fall behind because they needed that one-on-one approach. They needed that teacher in front of them, and asynchronous learning or synchronized learning was not something that they were certainly able to grasp and to be successful with. Your young people who like to experience, they're tech savvy. They are those independent learners. They're going to learn whether a teacher's in front of them or not, did exceptionally well. But the students that needed the support, we saw our greatest trend of a downward spiral even more because they did fall farther behind. So for us, that was, trying to come up with, what do we do strategically at this point now to ensure that we are reaching not just some children, but our children. The other trend that we saw as well, and I think this was across not just our district, but districts, was just the understanding the language of technology at that time. And so putting parameters in place, of course, when we're in person, we know to come in and sit down. And we know that we take out our pencil, and there are just some things that we do. At home, of course, there are other distractors. You started hearing certain family dynamics in the background. And so you had to teach young people how to mute, et cetera, and communicate appropriately. But we also had to learn that we could not sit children down in front of a computer screen and teach them for consecutively 6 periods or 4x4 schedule, et cetera. There needed to be breaks in between. And as the professional educators, we needed to do a better job of understanding how we track data at that time. And so part of that trend, I would say, is that we saw that definitely reading scores definitely suffered even more. And that could have been because books were not in homes or books were not on Lexile levels, et cetera, or they didn't know how to identify those Lexile levels. The intense support that young people would receive in after school care, that was not something that was there as well to give them that extra support that they needed to remain studious, I should say. And then asking questions for clarity also was an area of weakness because, again, that teacher was not there consistently throughout that child's learning. And so we saw math scores, which were already low, not just across one district, but across our state, across our nation. And so those areas, again, were probably areas that were already suffering, but we saw a greater divide because of some of the trends that developed with the lack thereof, or the learning that we, as the adults to deliver instruction, had to learn as well. We also had a learning curve, not just our young people.
You answered the question before I asked. So how did they combat? I mean, like you said, it was new. It was new to everyone. And for me, unfortunately, during COVID, I took advantage of that time and went into business. I got away from education outside of, just tutoring, helping friends online. And for me, tutoring or teaching math has always been an easy task. So if someone is struggling with something, I can easily identify what's wrong, what they're missing. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
a 15, 20-minute chat and a couple of examples typically is all I need to get a student on task, or to help them to have a conceptual understanding. So I didn't think
Hmm.
about it until I went back into the schools. And like you said, it's like, are our homes ready for online learning? And are our homes ready to supplement instruction in the schools? How can we extend that instruction when the kids come home? Do we have dictionaries? Do we have books? What are some of the things that the kids are being exposed to? And what are some things that we're talking about around our children beyond the how was your day? And we spoke on previous episodes about how vague those daily conversations are when we pick the kids up or they come in. It's typically how was your day, and we pat ourselves on the back because we felt like we're there, we're active, and we checked on our kids.
Hmm.
But those are just surface level. And what do we do to extend it? Do we allow them to come home and discuss in detail what they learned? Do we ask, what were some of your challenges? What were some of your accomplishments in school? And
Well,
go ahead.
go ahead. Well, to your point, I do believe that we can extend our. I think you always can extend learning. How that looks in your home is certainly up to that individual family. What that sounds like is what you create, and it's how far you want to go. But I think what we as educators must do a better job of is that we must invite our parents in, our grandparents in, because again, we have extended families now where we don't have traditional families that are just raising children. There are multiple formats right now of extended families that are doing the best that they can. We don't judge them because of that. But what we do, I believe, is we give them tools that they can utilize at the appropriate time in their comfort zone. But we also have to make our area, and I'm speaking of our schools, our learning institutions, more welcoming, where our families who do need that support again can come and get that support without being judged as being a non-supportive parent, or you just don't know. And oftentimes we as educators may not know that that's our language, so to speak, but we often say we want engaged parents. But when parents become engaged, then it challenges us as well, because now we are on our toes and now we're being called and held accountable. And I
Right.
always say to individuals, with accountability comes responsibility. And so some of us are not willing to accept that responsibility. It's easy for me to say that I want it and this parent is not responding. But when the parent does respond, then I am probably a little more offended, so to speak, because
Mhm.
now I have to ensure that I can deliver what I say I'm able to deliver. And so now I know that eyes are on me as the educator and not so much the parent. So I do believe, to your question, we can certainly extend learning. I believe that again, we must do a better job of teaching and modeling how that looks, how that
Okay.
sounds, how that feels. And it may not be the same cookie cutter approach for everyone. It may not be, but there are just different strategies that we can try that for our young people would be simple in what they're doing in order for them to adjust.
Okay. I like what you said. And that is another topic. I think that, and this happens more often than not, some teachers feel like they're the expert, especially when you talk about secondary, because now I majored in this. I'm a content area expert. I majored in biology. I have my degree. I'm the teacher, and they expect parents to just accept their level of expertise, accept their words, and sometimes some teachers do this, and just expect them to listen, right? Or especially when you're in low income areas and turnaround schools or turnaround environments, they're accustomed to speaking above the parents anyway. So it's like, well, they won't know what I'm talking about. I can just say X, Y, Z. But like you said, when the parents become empowered and now not challenging to belittle you, but just being equipped to engage in some of those discussions. I've seen teachers get offended or some are just in awe. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that we need that accountability as an educator as well.
Mm-hmm.
Challenge me. You know,
Mm-hmm.
if there are some things that you think I can do better, tell me. If there are some things that you feel that your child should know in addition to what they're being taught in the classroom, say those things to me as well. Uh, this is good. I want to segue into the teacher shortages, right? Well, let's go
Mm-hmm.
back to funding disparities.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to highlight an unequal distribution of resources across schools, right? Particularly between urban, suburban, and rural areas and how this affects student outcomes. Do you agree that there is a funding disparity? And if so, the factors that causes those disparities? Can you discuss that one?
Oh, sure. I do believe that there is a funding disparity. I think there will always be. Houses are being built in neighborhoods and communities, and you can see the haves and the have-nots very clearly. You can drive in any district, and you can and you can see specific factors that describe specific schools, and whether a PTSA or a PTA is active in a school when you enter that school. Whether or not there's a booster club at the middle and the secondary level that is active or non-active or inactive, I should say. I think when you say factors, of course, our funding for schools is local funding and state funding. And so here again, that is really where our federal and our state dollars come in, and our tax base is important. And so if you have a strong tax base, then your district is more apt to have the funds that they need. Of course, you will always need funding and more funding because it becomes more and more expensive to educate every child as we continue to evolve into this world of the unknown, so to speak, with what our young people are facing now, particularly with AI and then jobs that exist that we don't even know what will be in existence at the time some of our young people will embrace again the role of being a employed individual and how that will look. The other side of that is when you don't have those funds and why those disparities exist and where do you get those funds. It's one thing to have funds and be able to utilize those funds. It's another not to have a need and you don't have anywhere because you can't get blood from a turnip. Okay.
Right.
We hear that. And so you can't continue to go and ask for your county to provide funding when taxes are not increasing because at some point you're going to ask for those funds from your taxpayers, and that be businesses or that be your homeowners. And we also know how that actually works when it comes to homes, et cetera, and retirement homes, et cetera. And so there are a lot of factors that do come into play. I won't belabor us by getting into that because that's another ordeal all by itself
Right.
without just seeing to the standpoint that, again, most of our districts, based on per pupil allotment, which is
Mhm.
why enrollment is so important, that is how our tax dollars are based. And that is exactly how. So we have a millage that districts use to calculate funding, et cetera, and much of that is set by your county. And because of that, you know what tax dollars you are getting because you know what your tax base are. So if you're in a large suburban community, you know that you have more funds coming in as opposed to a rural area.
And parents have to understand that places a limit on some of the things that you can do. One of the challenges, well, and then to supplement that, you have to then seek an employee for special programs and special funding so that they can solicit supplemental funding, supplemental aid. And that's one of the things that you discussed. Like, where will we get this additional money, especially in rural areas or areas that don't have a lot of businesses. They don't have a lot of homes that produce a tax base that all the districts are privy to. And of course, with supplemental funding comes a lot of oversight as well, because you can say, well, okay, we'll receive some 21st century funding, but it comes with stipulations, or it has to be used for something in particular. And how do you do that? And then you have to become creative with soliciting the funds, and also how do you use the funds. The next topic that I want to talk about is the teacher shortage, right? And here, I just want to explore the challenges of recruiting and retaining qualified teachers, including low pay, burnout, lack of support. And when I say lack of support, this is why it is so important. A lot of people think about having a strong leader, as they put it. And I'm just being honest and transparent here. In a lot of minority school districts, we feel like we need a relatively big black male. If you go around the U.S. and you look at the low performing school districts, inner city schools that are considered rough, many of them will have a large black male as the building level leader. It may send a message, right? But it's not like the leaders or the corporal punishment no longer exists. So it's not like we're paddling kids, right? So
Mm-hmm.
to me, I think that you must have an academic leader, because teachers get burnt out and you're already faced with funding challenges. So if a teacher needs support or they need something, if you feel like, you know what, I observe this classroom, right? And I think that those kids would do well in a project-based learning environment. But you could have a certified educator, but they just aren't good at that. Then what do you do? Do you have enough money to send all of your kids to a conference that's probably $600 per? You have to fly them there, hotels, and when they get all of these things, you run the risk of them wanting to leave and go elsewhere. But how do you combat this teacher shortage? And I want to hear about some potential challenges as far as recruiting and retaining.
Well, let me just begin by saying that I don't believe that we just have a teacher shortage. I believe that we have an educator shortage. I think at one point we did have just a teacher shortage, and we can certainly stick to that topic, but I think it would be difficult to talk about a shortage without talking about all things working together for the betterment of the organization. I think you have to look at the whole and not part of the whole. And so when we talk about shortages, we have an educator shortage across this nation. It is not just a teacher shortage anymore. And of course, we do have a teacher shortage, but we have a a food service shortage. We have a custodial shortage. We have an administrator shortage.
Yes.
And so we have secretary shortages, just the front office individuals. And a lot of that is because, number one, the lack of pay and individuals not being able to support their families off of that one income, and particularly males. If most of your men, if they can make more, and they can, doing something other than teaching, particular first year teacher salary, then guess what? That's what they're going to do. And they could be some of your sharpest individuals. So I think the one thing that we have to do is we have to, first of all, you do need a quality leader, a strong leader. You mentioned academic leader. You do need an academic leader, but you also need a leader who is able to function in a political arena in which we are now operating. So administration is no longer just the books, butts and buses and things that we used to do in academic. You're now having to now understand how to be a political leader as well. That brings another whole, standpoint or stance to where we sit as educators now. And so you find many people that, hey, that's just not what I signed up for.
Right.
And I don't want to be a part of that. So that's another challenge when you talk about leaders, so to
That's
speak.
where I
Okay.
was at a point in my career, and I stepped away because I was like, this is not what I signed up for. And what was very alarming was when I was in a program like at Clemson, we actually took a course that
Mm-hmm.
taught us, the political side of being a district level leader.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in awe. And one of the first things that I remembered was, and there were like a group of superintendents that came in from all over. Most were from South Carolina, a few were from other areas, but they shared minute details with us. I'm talking about down to the dress code of how men should dress on their superintendent interviews, how women should dress, certain things that we should say, the proper way to respond when being greeted. I'm well, thanks for asking, how are you, in that order. The what I call my Republican blazer, the navy blue blazer with gold buttons, pressed white shirt, red or blue ties, brown shoes. And I was like, wow. So, and also understanding the importance of, it was called school board relations. That was the course that we took, and the importance of being actively aware of school board members and the things that you would be asked to do. And I was like, man, this is just some book stuff. And as soon as I got into this role working as an assistant superintendent, a board member who actually was not even a high school graduate, but this person was elected as a board member, did not like an elementary principal and wanted me to get rid of that principal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when I did not agree to do it, I was just telling them, like, this is not how this works. You have to understand school law. That's not how it works. Like, if there are some concerns, you have to present it to that individual. With me being a district level leader, I was assistant superintendent. It is now my role to provide them with the resources that they need to accomplish the things that I'm saying they should accomplish. Also, they have to be placed on a growth plan. We have to create benchmarks to say, okay, you have until this time to do X, Y, Z. You don't just go in and say, you're out of here. So, of course, in retaliation, I was then demoted from
Mm-hmm.
from my role, and the board members held a special meeting, and they decided to do away with the title. They were no longer going to have an assistant superintendent, and they got rid of the executive director of operations title because that title came with a $20,000 supplement. And they felt like that was a way that they could reduce my salary mid-year, like after the school year began. So I'm like, man, these people really don't know what they're doing, and they're making emotional knee-jerk decisions. Needless to say, I ended up suing the district and winning. I didn't even have to have an attorney to do so. But the superintendent, he wanted to protect his salary. So out of fear, he listened to what the board members did. He demoted the principal. He promoted a classroom teacher to principal. And that's where I got to see how chaotic it can be. So when you talked about navigating in that political arena, I guess the higher you go, the more political it becomes.
And that's true. It does. It does. And so you just have to understand that there is an unspoken language, and you learn to speak that language. And you described wearing your navy blue blazer with gold buttons. And so it goes down to the car that you drive,
Oh,
so
yeah.
there are a lot of things that you will learn how to navigate as that leader. And it's so easy on the outside looking in, because when you're in the seat
Hmm.
and it all stops with you, that individual, then suddenly the lens and looking out of that lens looks a little different. When you have several arrows or hands pointing at you or depending on you, and again, and whatever answer you provide or however you respond, yeah, it tends to bring about, again, maybe an outcome that you're not looking for, or that you just can't avoid. But whatever it is, you learn how to deal with that. Something else that you said in your opening regarding placement of administrators in regards to most of your rural schools having African American male, so, quote unquote, big black male there because, they felt that that was probably the best thing to deal in
Yeah,
similar
having a
to
strong leader.
school.
Right.
Yeah, having a strong leader.
To
And so
deal
they're
with the
looking at,
community, dealing with
sure,
coaches, dealing with,
mhm,
angry parents, fussing at coach, like someone, like we're bodyguards.
sure, sure. And that can be a perspective that is misunderstood, and that can be that unspoken language as well. But I think the stance that we have to set, number one, is that we have to understand that education is a foundation for all. Okay. I truly believe that public education period, and is definitely a a standard that cannot be minimized or should not be minimized. We, every child should have an opportunity to receive a quality education in the best organization possible with an exceptional teacher delivering that instruction to them. And I believe it that if we all felt that way, and that is what we all set as a standard, then regardless of what my zip code is, I would receive and can receive a quality education. That's not what we are experiencing though currently. And so when you talk about the strength of an individual being identified by who is in the position and by how they look, we are really not where we need to be if we're still doing that. Let me say that.
Do you agree that it happens?
But I do agree that it does happen, and it's probably happening more than we believe it is happening.
Hmm.
But if that's where we're going, then we should not be confused about the outcome of where we are currently as a nation, as a community, as a district, if that is what we're continuing to do. And so if we're not going to value leaders based on what they bring to the table and their worth, then we really should not be at the table. Okay. And so I think and if you are hired and that is what you are hired for or viewed as, then, my challenge to those leaders are very clear. Then you change that narrative and you write your own. You don't let someone else write your narrative or put you in a position as though you appear to be what someone else has made you into be. And so, when I think of a strong leader, I think of leaders that are visionary leaders. I think of those that are transformational in what they do, but I also think of leaders who are able to stand in the midst of adversity. And for me, that speaks volumes to your integrity, but it also allows me to develop a trust that you are in it for the right reason. And so, but discipline largely becomes the reason for that. And so, because most of the time in some of our toughest schools,
Yes.
that is an issue that we deal with. And so typically the stance is, yeah, you do become that bouncer. You do become that, that individual that if you need to,
Get in
step,
his face or
you can
step to
do
a
that.
parent, step to
Yeah.
an irate fan or irate person in the stadium. But I want to dig a little deeper into this because I'm thinking about challenges, right? Of course, with recruiting. I worked as a leader, a building level administrator at the alternative school. So of course that poses a greater challenge in itself because of the stigma associated with being at an alternative school. Everyone thinks, oh, you have the absolute worst kids. You have the worst of the worst, or they're bad, or I don't want to work there. So
Mm-hmm.
that in itself poses a challenge. Now, what has been helpful is the teachers have done a great job at recruiting other teachers
Sure.
because they're able to find that silver lining and they're telling their friends, hey, look, we only have 32 middle school kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have your
Mm-hmm.
4 core classes, you have a lab, you have PE. So you split 32 kids up in 6 different classes. We get about 5 kids per class, literally. On the high school side, the same thing. You have 5, maybe 6 kids. And if you're teaching a higher level course, like U.S. history or government that are usually taken by juniors and seniors, you rarely get seniors at an alternative school. So
Sure.
you may have one student and you still get a 90-minute break, a delayed start. Like they'll recruit using the benefits. Now the low pay, I don't face that challenge where I am now, but I know that it is a greater challenge in areas like Charleston, Savannah, and other industrial complexes. So some of the things that I recall, researching, right? And when I say industrial complexes, there are
Right.
certain industries that are replicated in the 5 lowest states academically. They all have the same agencies and organizations. They all have a Nucor steel plant. They all have there were like 5 companies. They all have a division of some of the car plants, right? So but you need manufacturing jobs. Everybody's not a rocket scientist. But now with the recent boycott at the ports and their collective agreement where these workers will earn, I think it'll be up to $59 an hour shortly.
Okay.
So you're talking $60 an hour roughly for 40 hours. That's $2,400 a week. You're going to make $120,000 annually without an education. How do I encourage someone to become a teacher cadet? How do I encourage someone to go off to college and come home and make $60,000 when someone else can make $120,000 without an education? So it's a greater challenge in those areas where you have industrial complexes because people are working at Boeing, they're working at Mercedes, they're working at Volvo, they're working at all these places in those areas. Another thing was burnout. So, you have to be strategic. You cannot give somebody all of the low performing classes. So now do I say, well, you know what? This teacher has never taught an AP course. I need to send them to wherever and hopefully they will get AP certified and give them an AP class or at least a CP course, something that will prevent with the burnout. And again, being able to support, because when you think about on the secondary level, everyone has an area of expertise. So even your administrators, in most cases, taught something.
Yes.
So if I was a science teacher, I was an ELA teacher, that is my area. How do I support a math teacher in my building? Or vice versa. If I'm a math teacher, then how do I support my ELA teacher? And it's going to look different. And I think that this is where you get a lot of, and I don't mean generic in a demeaning way. I just mean generic because it's what it is. Now you start to look for generic things. People say, well, good instruction is good instruction. But when you're talking about different courses and from experience working in a high school environment, most of my career, a good math teacher looks different than a good ELA teacher or a good history teacher. Like they do certain things. There are certain things that great teachers do. I agree with that, but
Mm-hmm.
it will look different. And unless you know what it looks like or what the prerequisites are or what's going on, I think that a lot of administrators can be fooled in their observations. And over time, have you ever had the experience of observing someone that you thought was a good instructor, but their scores said differently? Their test scores
Sure.
didn't reflect that?
Absolutely.
And I want
Absolutely.
to invite, we have other administrators here as well. Please feel free to chime in if you would like to share some experiences or anything dealing with the topics that we've discussed. We began talking about the pandemic learning loss and that whole experience, funding disparities, and now we're talking about the teacher shortages. So how do you combat those things again? Especially when we talk about the lack of support or educator burnout.
Well, I want to go back to something that you said in regards to good instruction is good instruction. And people do say that, but that's true. Good instruction is good instruction. I think your delivery in your concept of what you're delivering in your specific core content classes, yeah, it is different. And it can be because your objectives are different. And so how you're delivering that and how you're planning for that, it is not going to be the same. However, you talked about, have you observed a teacher who was really doing a great job, and it could have been engaging their students.
Mm-hmm.
That's the part. It could have been a well-behaved class, and that's what you were believing to, and that's what we typically do. We typically walk into classrooms, and if they're quiet, if they are engaged, if children are sitting down and teachers are definitely engaged with their learners and their learners are engaged with them, hey, we believe everything is happening as it should, because it's not the norm of what we typically deal with as administrators. Most of the time, if we get called to a classroom as administrators, it's because there is a problem. There is a problem going on, and it's normally disruptive behavior of some sort. And so when we do walk into classrooms, of course, we are walking in for specifics, but most of the time we're going in just to do a check off as well. So I think, my challenge is twofold. I'm always a teacher at heart. I believe that we also must be visible without it being that time of the year that we have to get observations
Do
done.
observations,
And we're
right,
just
right.
and we're just trying to get them all in. And so teachers have to see us also in our element of just being a true, authentic leader and not having a reason to be engaged in instruction. And sometimes we miss that mark as administrators, in my opinion. Going back to something that you said in regard to the students, burnout, that every teacher, you can't just give all the teachers the low performing courses, etc. I'm going to be honest with you. I beg to differ. And I say that for several reasons. One reason is, as an administrator, when you have the brunt of the State Department, or and your district or your school is on the verge of takeover or on the verge of underperforming, or you don't want to be on the list with underperforming schools, and you have a quality teacher that can reach based on data, not what I feel, but what this individual has certainly proven, that they can move my lower performing young people. Guess where I'm putting my lower performing students?
In that
I'm
purpose, right.
placing them. I certainly am, because there's a lot riding on the
Everybody's
optic.
job.
It's a lot riding on the
Yeah,
optic. The optics
right.
are what they are. And so we can sit here and say, now again, this is my opinion. You can disagree with me, and I'm okay with that. But, when you're talking about moving a district and being transformational, a part of that is being able to place people in their element of strength. Okay. And so just because you can teach an AP course, well, most of our kids who are AP students, guess what they don't need?
A teacher.
They don't need a teacher. You
Right.
can put most of your AP babies on a computer. They can
And
go
they'll figure it
into,
out. Yeah.
and they'll figure it
You can
out.
put a group of them together and they'll solve complex problems by just
Absolutely.
bouncing off of each other. I agree. Yes.
And so I'm not going to use an FTE and then most of the time, if you were to really track data and you were to follow each of those young people who are AP students, you don't see them growing much sometimes. And so the challenge then becomes, how do I grow them even more when you're already maxed, or you're at your point of performance where you're already above performing, or you're high performing? And so is Richelle going?
With assessment.
Yeah. Absolutely. So is Richelle going to, as an administrator, look at the individuals that she has in her building or district and have a meeting of the minds and encourage them to teach those students that may not be where they need to be? Because I know you can't. Absolutely, I am. But those are also the educators that I'm going to massage, and I'm going to continue to support, and I'm going to give them their accolades, et cetera, because you do need them. And more than we believe we need them, because it is something to sit in a seat and be amongst your colleagues and your peers and other superintendents and other principals, and your school is on the list of underperformance. Nobody wakes up wanting to fail at all on any given day. I don't care who you are and where you are. You don't wake up wanting to fail. And let's be clear, when you taste success, guess what you want to continue to taste always?
More success.
You want to continue you want success. You want more success. So I always say to individuals, to whom much is given, much is required. The reward for good work, guess what it is? It's more work. And so if you're showing up and look, you're on your game and you're doing, what you do, you're going to get more work. That's what it is. It's just the arena. It's what that's just the nature of the beast.
I share that with a colleague. We speak often. She too is an administrator, and it's like she gets not complaining about being overwhelmed, but I keep saying, you don't have to show them all that you know. But also as a leader, right, you can delegate roles, but at the end of the day, the responsibility still comes back on you. So you want the best person for the job. And I know if somebody is very thorough and I know that you're already doing ABC, guess what? I'm going to see if I can get you to do D, E, F, G, H, and on. It's not fair, but like you said, you have to do what's best for the school, do what's best for the kids, and focus on the big picture. So it is bad that the reward for doing great work becomes more work. And it happens. Now, this actually ties into the next topic in question. So I want to know this, because we talked about testing and observing those teachers who we thought, did a great job, but the scores did not reflect it. Now,
Sure.
What I want to know is, can we talk about the role and effectiveness of standardized tests in measuring student achievement and shaping educational policy? And can I state my position first?
Sure, absolutely.
Because it's controversial. I know a lot of people don't agree, but personally, I don't subscribe to people being poor test takers, because a test asks you a question and either you know the answer or you do not know the answer. That's just me personally. That's how I feel. But I've always been a good test taker, but I really feel as though the test asks a question. And what I try to tell the teachers are, you're not teaching the standards. The test is testing the standards. That is where the disconnect is. It's not that, it's not for our kids. It's not. No, you're told that, and I'm using math as an example. That's my area of expertise. If I say to you, in geometry, the kids must know this. It's clearly written. It tells you what the standards are, what they need to know, and how do they demonstrate mastery of this. They must be able to do X, Y, Z. If you choose to teach it in a different way, or you choose to teach things that is not directly related to that standard, and then at the end of the year, they're tested on the standard, you can't blame the test. And you can't just teach what you think they need to know, because these standards have been researched. Many of the standards are prerequisites to future courses. And in the grand scheme of things, you know that we cannot teach every page in every book the entire school year. So we're looking at about 6 key modules with about 3 to 4 elements within each module. And so each unit takes about 6 weeks. You have just using basic math, you have 36 weeks and 6 units, which you want to compress it because you're going to be tested before the last day of school. So you really have about 30 weeks or so. So you get about 5 weeks per unit. And these are the things that have to be tested. So for me, that's just how I feel when it comes to standardized testing. And of course, I expect others to feel differently. But I want to know, how do you feel as far as the effectiveness of standardized tests when it comes to measuring the student achievement and shaping educational policy?
Well, I don't, so you, yeah, this is such a
Question.
It is a very much so loaded question, and I probably will not answer it in its totality, only because, so my perspective is definitely, I certainly do agree in some regard with what you said as far as teaching standards. But let's talk about teaching standards though. So we have to admit now at this point that many of our educators that are teachers at this point are coming from the business sector, or they're coming. This is a career. path for them. And so it's not the traditional pathway that we probably were able to take and become educators, etc. So it may not be the same path. Doesn't matter. We're still here. We're doing the same thing for the same cause, or at least we should be. But where it becomes a little different is but we have to also admit, in my opinion, here again, it's my opinion and we can agree to disagree, but standardized testing is normed reference for, and they really, it measures supposedly what you were supposed to be taught. However, the assessment, I don't believe is written for specific children. I believe that it is meant to. I believe that it is truly meant to separate those that are high performers, and that's what it does, definitely. But it also lends a different picture that may not be true. Because if we're not going to, because you can't, how do you measure whether a child comes into your classroom and they had a good night's sleep? How do you measure the work, those things that are happening in homes? And I take a test on this given day and Richelle just may not have done well, but on a separate day, Richelle may just do well if her circumstances were different. And so I think we have to be very careful when we place young people, when we put it all on the line and say, Richelle is not a great student, or she did not perform because she did not perform well on this standardized test, when it was never written for me anyway to perform well on. Now, I may be a great test taker just as you are, but does that truly measure what I know as an individual? I beg to differ. It doesn't. Because if I'm having a bad day, guess what? I don't care anything about your test. And you can't make me take the test. In fact, there are parents that are so savvy that guess where their kids are because I know my baby is going to score well, and I'm not supporting you trying to get scores for your school or using my baby. So guess what I might do? Guess what? I don't have to test my baby. I don't have to send my child to school. So there are parents that play that side of the spectrum. There are parents that, look, my baby is more than a test score. But there are also teachers who believe that when you take a stance about standardized testing, that you're asking them to teach to the test. So is that what we're doing?
What else should they teach to?
Well, that's what they should teach to. But
yeah,
if
I
they're
never
not,
got that complaint. Everybody says, oh, they want us to teach to the test. What else should you be teaching to? That's what they're going to be assessed on. So tell me what else should you teach to other than teaching to what they're going to be tested on?
And so that's a complaint. That's a complaint. Yeah, but I believe but they should be testing. And this is why I said this was a loaded question, because your tone got a little excitement there. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. That's a good thing, because then I get excited as well. However, let me say this, and then, Richelle will be quiet and allow someone else to speak if they choose to. But I believe that we should teach to the standard. But unpacking a standard and truly understanding how to teach a standard are two different things.
Right.
And what we don't do a good job of as administrators or as those as coaches or modeling is that we don't help our educators understand what they're being asked.
And what does it look like? Correct.
And what it looks like, what it sounds like, and how do we pivot when that doesn't happen? But yet we observe them and then we hold them to it, but we have not given them again the tools to be successful. So if we're going to hold you to a standard, then we ought to at least provide you the tools to exceed that standard or to be successful meeting the standard. Okay.
Well, again, and the reason I apologize, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
The importance of having an academic leader. And
so let's be clear on that, Mr. Mitchell. Let's be clear, because now we can say we have academic leaders, but now we also have academic leaders who are just, again, individuals who are strong in, it could be just a specific content area. Okay.
Right.
So they are also out of their comfort zone as well. And then when the nuances of administration and the other things that are unplanned start happening in your world as an administrator, suddenly academics becomes less of your day because you are trying to support that teacher and remove or help them understand how to deal with little Johnny who comes to school every day and doesn't miss, And so in the educator's defense, we do have to ensure that the learning environment is conducive to learning and that we are not robbing the educator of their time to teach, but we're not also robbing other children of their time to learn.
Right.
And so
that is very important as well. And I don't want us to enable the children because I too experienced what we describe as a rough life, and I went through that phase. But one thing I can say now as an adult, and I wanted to say it earlier, just being devil's advocate. And Dr. Green and I, we always go back and forth when it comes to this. We agree on a lot of things, but this is one area where we often disagree. When we talk about little Johnny having a bad day, or didn't get breakfast, XYZ, I've never seen that stop them from playing basketball at recess. I've never seen it stop them from learning a new dance. I've never seen it stop them from reciting the words of their favorite song. So the ability still exists. I too was that student. I experienced a phase of poverty. I went through a phase where I knew I didn't have anything to eat at home. So I got lunch detention daily so that I could eat leftover foods, right? But guess what? I knew the words, the self-destruction word for word. I knew every rap song that I wanted to know, dance moves, kid and play, whatever I wanted to do. I still went to JV basketball practice. I did those things. So it became an excuse. Now,
But you did those things, and let me just make a point before you move on, and please move on. But you did those things to belong, and so let's be
right. That's what I'm getting at.
Let's put it in perspective.
So now being smart or doing well on tests isn't cool. And that's why a lot of kids don't do their best, or they do things to belong. So we can't fault the test. We can't fault the test for that. And we cannot say, I don't think it's fair to say that the tests are designed for certain people. And well, if we say it's designed for certain people, it's designed for people who prioritize. And the tests simply ask a question. Do you know the answer to this question or you don't?
But how do you know the answer? How do you know the answer if I spend 75% of my day with the principal, or I didn't make it to school?
I agree. I agree.
How do you know the answer? So it is,
I agree with
test is, yes, the test is built. I think it's structured just as a newspaper is written on a specific level. Like we can build prisons by taking literally our data, our third grade data, third grade data
to build prisons
is utilized to build prisons. So you talk about the pipeline to prison, which is another total topic. We can stay on that all day. However,
do you think it's a bad thing to use third grade data?
No, I don't think it's a bad thing, but then why not use that same data to figure out how we can make kids successful? Why are we using it to build a pipeline to prison, but we're not using it to build a pipeline to success?
Because you have different agencies. There are two different agencies that are utilizing the data. So you have investors, and if I'm an investor and a group of people say, hey, look at these trends, right? For decades, the students in Charleston County have been low performing. The students all along I-95, what they describe as this corridor of shame, have been low performing. The students in Atlanta have been low performing. What I realize is if these kids cannot read effectively by grade 3, by the time we get the right mayor in place, by the time we apply for permits, perking the property, getting everything in, getting these huge things built, if we have to get an easement, if we need an exit to develop anything, we have 10 years because third graders are 8 years old and they're turning 9. 10 years down the line, they'll be 18. So if they cannot read in the third grade, chances are they're going to end up in prison. So if I realize that 50% of these kids cannot read on grade level by grade 3, it's safe to say, even if we only go with half of that, 25% will end up doing something detrimental or will not go off to college, will not have high paying jobs. So we have to prepare ourselves because we can't just say, hey, how many kids graduated? Oh, now let's build it because you need to, they're forward thinkers. It's
I
bad.
understand that. And I believe, and I'm going to say this and then
Hmm.
I can accept what you said, but
No, don't change the
then
stance. I just wanted to express mine.
I'm not,
So,
oh, trust me, I will never change my stance because I have,
okay.
my stance is what it is, and I'll dig my heels in all day if I believe in something
Hmm.
wholeheartedly. And that's where I'm standing now. Let me say this, to your point, and it's great to be forward thinkers and it's great to be, forward planners and planning in advance, but we need to take that same energy. You need to take that same energy and we need to plan in advance for young people who need the support for success. It's nothing wrong with planning for success. See, as a business owner, I'm also planning for success as well. And you're right. I'm taking that data and I'm utilizing it and I'm triangulating it to make sure that I understand how many homes I would need to build in this development in 2028, so to
Yes.
speak,
Yes.
and how much it's going to project and how many of those homes are going to have children in it, or whether it's going to be a retirement community, or whether I'm going to lease those out, or whether I want to sell them and just get all my money at one time. I'm thinking about those things. I'm also thinking about prime property. So if I'm thinking about success for myself, then I should also be thinking about success for others. And if I know that, let's take the corridor of shame. Let's take I-95, the corridor of shame. Okay, let's talk about that. Then we fail. If we are not willing to do that, those of us who are capable of doing that, and we have the resources and we have the brain power and the bandwidth and the wherewithal to do it, then we failed young people. And because we continue to fail them, then we will always have a system where we're having systematic issues that we can't change. And it becomes now a generational repeat consistently because we've never broken the cycle. The I-95 corridor shame is real. And I know that because I was a principal in one of the schools. And when I walked into one of those schools as a first year principal and leaving Charlotte Mac, okay, coming to one of those areas, the hardest thing for me to do was to get up and report to work every day. And that was
Why was that?
because the school was nasty. It wasn't well kept.
Mm.
And it was different from where the grass that I was coming from. It was totally different where, hey, the lights were bright. The parking lot was clean. The landscape was welcoming. The feeling in the school was all of that. We were laughing. We were cheerful. Hey, we knew each other. It is a different feeling when you walk into a building and it's dim, it's drab, and it doesn't look well kept. If
Mhm.
I don't want to be there as the adult, then how do I expect teachers and children to want to be there as well? But then we're talking about children on this I-95 that I wake up where I may not even have windows in my home. Okay. And so you want me to leave my home where it's already probably not the best for some, but it's what I have. And then you want me to come into the same thing and feel different and do differently? It's not going to happen. See, it was difficult for me to get beyond the walls were gray and they were not right for young people. And we call it an elementary school. And so when you get up every day and you don't want to be somewhere, you will never give 100% to anything.
You
And
get
so
burned out.
Richelle had to change her perspective
Hmm.
and begin to understand what the low hanging fruit were and begin to grab those fruit and eat them one by one, sometimes all at one time, because you had to make a immediate impact to make a substantial change that individuals saw change and begin to change mindset so that hope could exist. And so for me, Mr. Mitchell, as an administrator who sat in the seat and I am sold out for public education. It is a passion for me that resonates that it's more than the job. It's the calling for what we have to do to ensure that every child wakes up every day with a quality teacher in front of them every day. And we shouldn't stop until that happens. And so when sewage is running over in a building and across in Hilton Head, you don't have that to worry about. When we put our players on a bus and our bus breaks down and people
Yeah, I
feel
was on
from
a
the
charter bus.
highway
Yeah.
and they know we're late to the game because our bus couldn't make it. And so we had to and our kids are having to walk in and still hold their heads up. Yeah, we can talk a different day about the haves and the have nots, but until we understand the perspective and the realness, this is real
Hmm.
and how it does feel. See, I didn't have the privilege of having everybody else do my job. I had to get in the cafeteria on some days if a food service worker was out sick, put on gloves. I never worked a commercial oven, but guess what I learned how to do? Work a commercial oven, and I did whatever I had to do. I hey, I if I had to go and pick up trash outside, I picked up trash. I rode buses to make sure that one of my babies didn't feel threatened by the bully or
Someone else on the
someone that
bus.
might be waiting for them at the bus stop.
I'm
And so,
laughing not at the experience, but because many people don't even know the things you have to do. And I did those things and more working at a charter because we don't have a district. At a charter school, you are the district. So,
mhm,
uh, I've driven a bus many days. We like the principal drove in the mornings. I drove in the afternoon. I had to get an engine replaced in a bus. I
mhm,
took the buses to get the oil changed. I've had to repair the
mhm,
electrical wiring that went into the trailers, had to get the ovens replaced. I had I mean, toilets, like everything. So I get what you're saying. And then other areas don't have to worry about that. I want to address one of our callers, one of our listeners, and anyone can chime in, please. The caller asked, what about neurodivergent students? And I want to explain to other listeners who may not be aware. And the neurodivergent students are students that have autism, dyslexia, ADHD, you know, and other impairments is how it will be described. And for me, weekly, and everyone's schedule is different, but weekly, we have a session called Talk About It Tuesday. And here's where we talk about all of our neurodivergent students. We let everyone in the building must be aware. I don't care if you're a custodian, you receive a copy of those accommodations. You're given details about how to engage with these students. Whenever a student comes in to the alternative school, I ask their homeschool administrators and parents to help me identify known triggers for their children.
mhm,
Also, some positive interventions or strategies that may have been tried that resulted in positive outcomes. And when the student is with me, I will also create a knowledge base for every single student. I can tell you, hey, these are triggers. This is when the student learns best. I would put these classes at this part in the day because this is what they do. And there are different things. You can talk about visual aids, cool down period. You can be creative
mhm,
and design a unique break pass for your kids where they get maybe 8 of them per week, 10 per week, 10-minute breaks in the classroom, whatever it is when they feel as though they're getting overwhelmed. I also work with teachers about creating that inclusive classroom.
mhm,
We also encourage discovery learning. I often reiterate with kids and say, hey, what did we come to school to do? Learn. You're not expected to know everything. So never be afraid to say what you do not know. I want to eliminate that anxiety. I want learning to be fun. I want them to feel safe and excited about school. And also teaching students like Dr. Anderson alluded to, we're in a phase where we're dealing with a lot of career changers, right? From when the economy stunk in 2010, '08
mhm,
to 2010, a lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people, they look down on education. And people will tell their kids if they have a degree and they're having trouble finding a good job, people will literally say, why don't you just go teach? Like it's that simple. And knowing something does not mean that you have the pedagogical skills required to be an effective teacher. So we have a lot of people here who don't know these things and they have to be taught on how to engage with neurodiverse learners. Again, you have to begin by creating a positive environment. You have to, and I have an unfair advantage because of small class sizes. And also at an alternative school, most of the kids there were, they have their own issues. So it's not as hard to create that climate in the culture to say, hey, we inquiry based learning. We want people asking questions, and we do not poke fun at anyone for not knowing and answer to something because we are here to learn. Some other strategies that I learned, because you have a lot of active parents. That's one advantage. When you have neurodivergent students, in most cases, their parents are far more active than the others, than regular ed students. And I had a parent that came to me and said that her child is more focused on fluorescent colors. So we went out and we bought some lime green paper and hot pink fluorescent colored paper and printed her work on that paper. And the student was able to remain focused. With my son, I have a son with autism. So I'm very aware of different things in his sensory level, different things that he can do, how to remain focused. You have to learn the endurance of students. How much are they able to read? How much text can they absorb at one time before we lose them? And others, even students that think that they're just, regular ed students, they need to know these things as well. But I want you all to chime in, please. The others, we have other co-hosts. Please chime in.
Hello,
Yes.
do you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just I want to join the conversation. What's
Yes.
the topic?
We're talking about the state of education, teacher
Aut-
shortages. Yeah.
Autism? Aut-
We're having
for
some
spe
technical difficulties. Oh,
for
okay.
special kids? For the special kids?
Yes.
Okay. I have some problem with mental core with my head, so I little bit know about this problem in my country, for example.
Yes.
My country is Russian Federation, unfortunately.
So do you have challenges in your public schools?
I did not research the problem of autism and Down and schizophrenia kids. I don't know really, but I know there is some programs to adopt to become the no, not the sponsors, so adopter of the lost kids
You said there are problems with the adults.
for adopt.
Okay. Okay.
So you can be narrator about like that narrator.
Okay. So
like a
how does it affect
director.
your economy or your society when you have the adults that are deficient?
I really don't know, but you say about economy.
Yes.
So we got improve our economic situation thanks to the Western sanction. We promote our own inner market. So
Yes.
we not to export. We got own for our purposes use.
So okay, I get what you're saying. So, and if you're not able to export products, then that will impact your GDP, like outside funds that you're able to bring into your country. Because without exporting, you're just consuming your items over and over and over.
I'm not sure about that, but I know we have trading with the China, maybe with South America countries, maybe with
Okay, so you are
African
still trading with
countries.
some countries. Okay.
Yeah, could be, it's possible.
Okay. Thank you for that feedback. The others, Miss All Hazel, Dr. Anderson, Tank, I would like to know, can you provide us some feedback on
Feedback.
neurodivergent students?
I'm not.
Dr. Anderson or Miss Williams, the floor is open for you all. Just want to hear about some strategies and experiences that you've had neurodivergent students.
Mr. Mitchell, I can, this is Dr. Anderson. I can
Yeah.
certainly just echo what you've already stated, honestly. That has pretty much been my experience as far as just working with individuals and individual teachers, I should say, just to ensure, and parents, that we understand how, number one, to accommodate, but what we're doing to make sure that individual learners who are identified as such can certainly feel supported. And so, I mean, there are various things that you can do, but I think you sort of spoke to too much of that. So I don't have anything new to add to that.
Okay. And welcome, Brenda. We have some new callers in. We're talking about neurodivergent students, our students with autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and other impairments. Congratulations. Oh, wow. So he's high functioning.
Yeah, he's high functioning, but he remembers, like, when he had to switch and go to behavioral school. Like, he's like, I don't like that school. They made me go to that school, and now I don't know how to read like the other kids in my 12th grade.
Oh, wow.
He's very good at the hands-on and everything. Like,
Well, he's identified his strengths. That's a good thing. And a lot of children with autism, they have their thing that they become infatuated with.
I'm sorry, what?
A lot of children with autism, they have a particular thing that they become infatuated with. We're having a hard time hearing you right now.
I'll back in later because my signal.
Right now, you're clear. Yeah, it is going in.
Okay. Yeah. But I'll just listen. But it really, and then working with students, I had one student that was not reading or writing in second grade. He didn't know, he was homeschooled, and nobody could work with him. And I saw that he liked to draw. So then I'm like, well, I took everything away from him, and you can't just rush these kids and think everything's okay, just fine.
Everyone does not develop at the same rate. I agree. And and I'm assuming, because you're very knowledgeable and being an educator, did you spend a lot of time communicating these things with the teachers and administrators? That is very helpful.
Like,
hey, this will work. Go ahead. Your phone went out again. I think you're in a bad area.
Well, the administrators, and also too, like, the one, he was, I just probably have to call back in later.
Okay. Thank you for your contribution. Okay, Dr. Anderson, I have another question for you. Doc, right now I want to talk about the future education, and we're also going to talk about technology in education, like the digital divide. Everyone has access now. In the past, there was a real divide. Like, affluent parents had iPads, but now everyone has access to technology. Kids have smartphones. We have tablets at home. And then districts have one-to-one. They can take their laptops or tablets home. But I want you to speculate on how education might evolve, with advancement in technology, AI being one of them, the changes in different policies, with no cell phones in schools, the vaping pandemic, and just shifting societal needs. How do you combat what's going on and what you need in your area? So I want you to just speculate on how education might evolve, in your opinion.
Well, I don't know that it would be speculation at this point. I think we can certainly speak from the standpoint, we know what vaping is doing for our, in our districts, in our schools, and with our young people. We know that, and how individual students are getting, able to. I think we're going to have a population of youth that will experience some health issues probably early on as they begin to matriculate through school that we have not probably seen before. So I'm not sure how to speculate on that other than I guess I'm speculating to say that I think we'll begin to see more health issues in our younger people as they grow older, and things that we just don't know will exist that are not already in existence. As far as technology, I think you certainly stated what I would have said as far as AI is concerned. Speculation there more so is what we're seeing. How we have to educate educate, educate, and we can't run from it. Some of us, I know personally, tried to shun it as much as I could because I did not want to embrace it, but it's here and it is ever more so advancing and evolving. And so I believe that we're going to have to adjust to understanding how it fits in and what that looks like. I'm not sure we're there, but I'm certain that we understand that education will not look, in my speculation, I guess I will speculate on that point, it will not look as it does now. I think that many of our young people will be able to, since choice is really now an option, I don't believe it's going anywhere. I believe that we will see more of our charter schools because they're choice schools, and our private schools probably moving more quicker, I think, than our public schools, so to speak, unless and what that will look like for me in my opinion honestly is I don't believe that how information is being delivered now from the standpoint of educators will look the same in the future. I believe that eventually we'll get to a point where the traditional teacher in the classroom just standing with a group of students all day other than to provide supervision is going to look much different as far as educating is concerned. What that's going to look like, Mr. Mitchell, I can't speculate on that. I certainly have not arrived to that point, but I do believe that it is going to be different in the delivery of instruction in classrooms.
That is my hope. And one example is this. When we think about accommodation with kids, and if you take in an open book test, it's like that's one of the hardest examinations ever. And so when we get access to more, I think that we can do more. We can push the kids to do more. It's like if you're allowed in the past, a calculator was viewed as cheating until you got to trig or calculus where the calculators were required. But I think that if you introduce calculators at an earlier age, then the kids can do so much more. And once they grasp the concept and have a conceptual understanding, so this advancement in technology, but I'm now wondering the impact it will have on reading, comprehension, and literacy, because students that are not proficient in reading will not perform well in math when it comes to word problems. They don't even know what they're being asked, so there's no way that they can solve the problem. And based on their answers, it demonstrates that they don't have a conceptual understanding on what is going on. And there are different methods or different strategies. I think years past, 10, 15 years ago, it was like the Rice strategy, where they would read, then illustrate, you calculate and compute, and then explain. And in one of those 4 steps, if a mistake was made, you should be able to identify.
Right.
But in a lot of instances, doing an error analysis is equally as important, because you can see where the mistake was made and does it make logical sense. And I think the part where I got upset because the way people tried bashing Common Core, and too many people in the public didn't even know what Common Core is. Too many educators did not know what Common Core was. Principals didn't know. I worked with a superintendent who didn't know what Common Core was, had no clue what Common Core was. And the components that were being introduced was not telling you to teach kids differently. They're saying, here is another method. Here's what is going on in this problem with the big picture. Because doing a simple calculation, yes, we were taught to calculate, right? But in the past, if our calculations were wrong, the problem was just wrong. We were not able to self-correct. We were not able to catch our mistakes. So the people who got it, and the ones who didn't, and they accepted this premise or label that they were bad at math. But when you're now taught to say, hey, you know what? 982 times 214, you know what? 982, that's actually closer to 1,000. 214, we're close to 200. So can I just multiply 1,000 times 200? And I know that my answer should be close to 200,000. That way, when I'm doing the old school vertical math and I go back and I multiply this and carry this and write it down, if I lose my place value, I know where it should go because I now know that my answer should be close to this number. And back to the core standards, this is something that so many educators didn't know, and it was disheartening. Common Core, not the name itself, it was renamed, but the concept of Common Core started in 1893. 1893 with what's called the Committee of 10. And anyone can go back and just do a quick Google search for the Committee of 10 in education. And I want to get the dates right. Exactly. The Committee of 10 in education. They formed in 1892. And you had like 6 college professors. I think it was made up of like 6 college professors, 3 heads of schools, which were like principals from the largest districts in the U.S., school districts, Boston, New York, and I think like Chicago, New Jersey, one of them, and someone from the U.S. what was equivalent to the Department of Education. And the reason that this was developed is because, and of course, it seems foreign to us, especially descendants of slaves, because we were confined to a certain area. But you had people that were traveling and earning degrees in the 1700s.
Sure.
You know, remember, like Thomas Jefferson and them had college degrees. You had people who were attorneys and everything back then that founded this country. So in the late 1800s, post-slavery, people are now moving all over the U.S. But college professors noticed that the level of education varied. And they're like, well, you know what? These kids are hard workers, but they don't know the things that the kids in these other areas know. So what we feel we should do is we need to come up with 16 courses, 4 years of math, ELA, science, and social studies. What should that look like? Those 4 things for 4 years, and then they get 4 electives for 20 units. It expanded to maybe 24 credits, but at the time, and you had someone from Harvard, the University of Michigan, Vassar College, University of Colorado, University of Missouri, Oberlin College, and a school in New Jersey, New York, and Boston. These members got together and created common standards for all students in the U.S., things that they all should know when you graduate. And this was from 1892. People went on and developed these standards and they accepted them. They accepted everything.
Absolutely.
But unfortunately, when President Obama came in and renamed it Common, which makes sense, it is common, right? And there are the core things that everyone should know. But when he called it Common Core, people shot it down. And it frustrated me that educators as well, how can you, especially military parents or transient students, because if I'm in the military or like yourself, you worked in North Carolina, South Carolina, you're close to Georgia. If your kid wants to go anywhere, they should get the same quality education and know the same things and not be limited or restricted when they get out of school. Because you don't want to say, hey, I want to go to UNC Chapel Hill. I want to go to Notre Dame. I want to go to Georgetown. Oh, we can't let you in because you didn't learn the things you needed to learn while you were in school in South Carolina. That's not fair to the kids. And to think, I'm amazed at the fact that people thought about these things back in the late 1800s.
And so what I heard you say there, Mr. Mitchell, though, was exposure. I think it goes down to exposure. And I think that it will be the lack thereof is why some kids will continue to not be able to propel forward because of the lack of exposure. And so those individuals in the 1800s were able to get together and create that common language because they were exposed to something different and they understood. And they too speculated, to use your word, what was needed and what would be needed in years to come. And we're still trying to arrive at that point. I do want to go back, though, to something that was said earlier that I think is kind of it fits into what you're saying, just to tie it in together when we talk about rural education. And so many young people, because of the lack of exposure, when they are exposed, say they do leave a place where it's a rural area, when they are out and they are exposed to something greater that they've never been exposed to before, 9 times out of 10, they don't return to their local area because of the exposure that they have embraced and what they've missed. And so what you found now in your higher ed places, and Clemson is a great example, that they provide, again, the support that is needed, consistent support that is needed to ensure that those individuals who are coming into college certainly
that they
have.
succeed. Yes. Yes.
Absolutely. And I think that if we're going to see a change in public education, knowing that there are disparities, we're going to somehow have to figure out what that model looks like as well, so that our kids are exposed and that funding does not become the barrier that creates that lack of exposure.
That is profound. Now, I want to piggyback on what you're saying, and that is something that friends of mine that talked about that attended Clemson. So Clemson has a great program when it comes to minority success. They have a lot of systems in place to make, and they understand, like you said, that these kids have the ability, they just weren't exposed. But there are so many factors that contribute to your, longitudinal success when it comes to education, and things that I think about when it comes to aligning courses. And something that I never thought about until I started researching was when we give our kids these advanced courses, right? And my child took algebra since the 7th grade, geometry in the 8th, algebra 2 in the 9th. It's good if they're going to go into the field of science and mathematics. It's constantly being applied. One thing that I didn't realize that hurt me was when kids were allowed to take French 1 in middle school, right, to earn high school credit. And then you take your second level of French as a freshman in high school. And if you're only required to take 2 foreign languages, you're done with that requirement by the 9th grade. But how proficient will you be in that foreign language if you never took that language or spoke it again in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade? And then you go off to college and your foreign language was French.
Sure.
But you went 3 years with no exposure to it, and then you're given this instruction on a college level. So for me, I was like, you know what? I have not done anything with French since the 9th grade. And when I got to college, you had people who had just literally taken French up until their senior year in June and came to college in August. They had a 2-month lapse. I had like a 3.5-year lapse. So I immediately switched to Swahili. That was my accepted foreign language, because Swahili is just like Geechee in Gullah language. But I thought about that too when we talk about, course alignments. We can also dig deeper into cross-curricular to see what classes should be taken along with what other courses in different disciplines. Because if you're taking chemistry, what math class would help you perform better in your chemistry class? Because you're dealing with balancing equations and scientific notations. So should I take trigonometry with chemistry? Physics deals with derivatives, velocity. Do we need to give calculus with physics? Is it overwhelming, or will it help one another? So many things you have to consider, especially as a district level leader, because those decisions aren't typically made by the building level leader.
Sure.
Oh my gosh, 2 hours have went by so fast. I wanted to get into a little detail about the per pupil spending and understanding that disparity. You have smaller districts that are around $9,000 to $10,000 per pupil. Other districts, they get about $20,000 per pupil, and we can get into details at a later date about where the money goes, some of the expenses that you will have, and how you have to be creative, of course, with spending these funds. But do you have any closing remarks? Anyone? Questions, comments, concerns? We're down to 2 minutes. This is amazing. 2 hours went by extremely fast today. But we have 2 minutes. Doc, what are your closing statements?
First, let me just thank you for the invite. It's always great to participate and share. Certainly, just a perspective, nothing that is etched in stone by far. And thank you to the individuals who certainly participated, listening and sharing their thoughts as well and our comments. We appreciate the support. And my encouragement to everyone, again, is to continue being great. Go and be great. Do something that you haven't done for someone to make them great, because you never know what individuals are dealing with at any given point in time. And I think as we continue to embrace this world, be it education, be it just from an individual standpoint of just being human, know that we need each other and that we're stronger together than we are apart. Thanks.
Thank you for those closing remarks. I want to speak to beyond the educators that are here, but for parents, you know, continue to challenge the teachers and educators, but also challenge your children, with that same fidelity, because we all grow together and we want to do what's right for kids. And in a lot of instances, we're doing what we know best. We're doing the best that we can, just like the kids are. But I think that we can accomplish and achieve so much more if we work collaboratively in identifying strengths and weaknesses so that we can combat them. But thank you all for coming out, and I look